Welcome to this month's Schuman Talk, when we talk about issues facing Europeans today. It was on May the 9th, 1950, at 6 p.m., that the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundation for the European house, where today 450 million Europeans live together in peace. And that's why we send out the Schuman Talk on the 9th day of each month at 6 p.m. French time. This was the defining moment of post-war Europe, in my book anyway, for it launched a European movement for peace and unity that has led to today's European Union. Now, Schumann's vision for Europe was of a community of peoples deeply rooted in basic Christian values. And he insisted that the European project must not just be economic or technological, it needed a soul. He believed that spiritual and moral foundations were fundamental to the future of Europe, a belief that was largely forgotten in the secular years to follow. Now, two particular streams of spirituality profoundly shaped Schumann's thinking. One was Catholic social teaching, stressing the dignity of every human being as created in God's image. The other was the teaching of Frank Buchman, who stressed 4 moral absolutes. The movement that Buchman inspired with his 4 absolutes was called Moral Re-Armament, a response to the arms race that preceded World War II. And the story of the influence of this movement on post-war reconciliation is a forgotten factor in the beginning of European integration. And it raises the question for us today, as we see the nations rearming again. Is it sufficient to rearm our nations without at the same time promoting a moral rearmament? And so the question we're going to address today is, do we need a new moral rearmament movement today? And it's a real privilege to have Dr. Philip Boobbyer with us from Kent University. He is also the author of The Spiritual Vision of Frank Buchman, which is a study of the faith, the spirituality, and ideas of the founder of Moral Re-Armament. It's now known as Initiatives of Change. Here's the cover of the book. Dr. Boobbyer has taught modules on European, Cold War, Russian history, collapse of the Soviet Union, Soviet propaganda, has written books and articles on Russian intellectual history, Britain in the 20th century, and the history of religion. So we're very thrilled that we could have Dr. Boobbyer with us today. So welcome, Philip, to this month's Schuman Talk, joining us from Canterbury.
Hello, Jeff. Hello.
We're really very keen to learn about the movement that used to be called Moral Re-Armament, had several names before it as well, and the message of its founder, Robert Schuman. Who was, Frank Buchman. Who was Frank Buchman? And tell us about the movement he started, Moral Re-Armament, where the name came from.
Well, just a few background biographical points, Jeff. Buchman was from small town America, grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was a Lutheran pastor who then became a university chaplain, and then he got involved in the American YMCA, which was a sort of became an international expression of faith. And through that, he kind of encountered the world outside the United States, Europe, Asia, and so on. And the movement he started was really an attempt to express faith and spirituality for international society. What would make the world work? He lived through, 2 world wars, massive division, and he wanted to take, traditional Christian thinking, but to re-express it so that it was relevant to global issues. So the two things he's associated with, which grow out of each other, the Oxford Group, which is roughly the interwar period, then birthing the movement known as Moral Re-Armament on the eve of the Second World War, they were expressions of that impulse.
Now, just going back to his spiritual background, there was an important moment in Keswick, up in the Lakelands of England, that was a turning point for him. Can you tell us about that?
I can. So Buchman was, as I say, he was a Lutheran minister. He was very involved in social work in Philadelphia. So he was a vicar with a social conscience, if you like. But he then got up against the board of trustees funding him and clashed with them. And his work came to an end, and he was very bitter about it. He went to the then yearly conferences in Keswick, famous center for Christian revival, and slightly by chance, but amazingly, had an experience, a kind of spiritual encounter that led to him losing his bitterness and writing letters of apology to those he had clashed with.
And this was involving Jesse Penn Lewis. Is that correct? Yes.
Famous figure who was a big figure in the Welsh revival of a few years earlier, and he was listening to Penn Lewis speak that. I think he thought that retrospectively he talked a good game in terms of his Christian principles, but that somehow some underlying issues in his character had not been addressed. And hearing Penn Lewis speak led to a deeper experience of Christ. And you could say that his subsequent life was a continual attempt to express that experience in different cultures and different contexts.
So you mentioned the Oxford group. Yeah. Explain that a little bit. How did they come into being?
Well, the Oxford group can be traced, broadly speaking, to post-war Britain and 1921.
Post-First World War, yeah.
That's post-First World War. He was working with students, doing sort of informal personal work, and he had a big impact on them, and a practical impact in terms of people finding faith and changing their life direction. And I guess a real sort of movement of the spirit grew out of that in the 1920s and into the 1930s. The Oxford group became really quite big in terms of numbers and impact in the 1930s, particularly in the universities of Britain and North America, but also in Scandinavia, in South Africa. It already had the trappings of something that was worldwide, but broadly within the sort of Christian network, I guess. It was a sort of people through it discovered a freshness of faith and a sense of purpose, that God, it was stressed in the Oxford group that God has a plan for your life and you can make a difference. And for people, young people who were faced with an extremely troubled world, the Wall Street crash, the rise of extreme ideologies, faith and making a difference to that world made sense. So it gave a framework of meaning.
So was he actually ordained in the Lutheran Church?
Yes, he was.
So, but he was a chaplain at the University of Pennsylvania, I think it was, wasn't it? And so he started his ministry really outside of the church box, we could say. And that was what was quite unique about this man, is that he wasn't using a church building as his main sphere of operation. That's
right. Yeah. So a very important formative period was when he was chaplain at Penn State, roughly 1907 to 1415. But yes, the Oxford group flourished not through having events and meetings in churches, but by having them in hotels and house parties. You wouldn't have, there were some church services or spiritual services, Christian services, but they were, as much would take place in an informal house party setting. So you take faith into the world which people are comfortable in, rather than invite people to come into another world. and,
Yes,
and in a way try to express faith in language. I mean, Buchman's work was quite influenced by the great Scottish evangelist Henry Drummond, and who hugely big figure in transatlantic Christianity. And he once said, Drummond, if you want to win somebody, you must talk to them in their own language. So you've got to translate your mindset and thoughts into a world and a set of ideas that people can relate to.
So can you give some examples? I think he talked about using radio as an example. Can you expand that?
Yes. So, I mean, in that sense, Buchman was part of a wider, impulse of people from in Christian missionary circles, I guess, to use contemporary technology. So that would be radio. So quite a lot of radio broadcasts by Buchman in the 1930s. There was also, in the beginning of the late 30s into the 40s and 50s, use of theatre, traveling musicals. So you would tell stories of how people could find faith and new direction through the stage. So always looking to innovate and find new forms of expression.
Yes, and what comes to my mind is he would talk about God is always there speaking. The problem is not with God sending the message. His problem is with us tuning in to his signal. Do you remember that?
I do.
I don't know where that comes from in his writings. Yeah,
that does come in, and he, I think he, it's possible that that's the post-war speech called "The Electronics of the Spirit," in which he you can tune into the radio, but are you tuning into the still small voice?
Yes.
Are you
yes.
are you making space to tune in to the deeper part of your heart and soul? You need, but how to express that so that people could connect with it.
So that actually points to one of his main emphases, the listening to the still small voice. Tell us about that.
Yes, of course, that's a famous Old Testament image, isn't it, from the Book of Kings, when the prophet Elijah finds the God's voice not in flashy things like earthquakes and fires, but in a deeper voice. Now, Buchman, in his early days, perhaps in fact all his life to some degree, but in his early days, he was something of an activist. He always thought he needed to be doing stuff. And the Baptist minister, F.B. Meyer, famous figure again in transatlantic religious circles, said, "Are you really taking time to listen to the Holy Spirit, the still small voice? Do you get direction?" And this spoke to Buchman, who thought that actually beneath the surface of his activism, he was the work he was doing was a bit superficial. So from then on, he used to have set aside time for quiet prayer, contemplation, deep inner listening, to make that the kind of the decision-making center of his life. And he encouraged his supporters to do the same. Mm-hmm. And he also, in some ways, tried to translate that experience into other cultures and other religious, non-Christian settings, where anybody could start by, let's take that image from that very universal image from the Old Testament. Anyone can start by trying to set aside time for that. So that's a vital element in Moral Re-Armament's tradition.
And that was really, a strong feature for Frank Buchman. He didn't divide people into Christians and non-Christians, but everybody was a child of God created in his image, and he was encouraging everybody to listen to God's voice, so that even today, Moral Re-Armament, renamed Initiatives of Change, you can say a kind of a Christian initiated movement for people of all faiths and none. Even today at their conferences, they still practice this listening to the voice. I've actually been to the conference, a conference up in Co, and people from many different religious backgrounds, but people were encouraged to come to the big veranda there early in the morning, and although corporately, but everybody individually listening to the small voice, whatever you want to call it.
That's absolutely right. So he's taking that concept that there's a deeper place to find meaning for your life into trying to take it into all cultures, and in fact many religious traditions and indeed secular traditions too have something of that there's you can connect with another level of meaning, if you like. So it's a language which people from non-Christian faith traditions can also relate to. So
basically, he was encouraging people to move towards their maker, wherever their starting point was. He didn't necessarily try to get them to sign a decision card, but they would develop a relationship with their maker by listening.
That's right. Start where you are. Don't necessarily try to bring a message and impose it on other people. Encourage people to start with the deepest thing in where they are in their own situation and in their own thinking. And most people can identify with the conflicts inside all of us between right and wrong, between love and fear, between honesty and dishonesty. Most people can relate at some level to that sort of thing.
Yeah, and he seemed to have a remarkable rapport, whether it be with kings and presidents or successful business people, or whether it be the chambermaid or a taxi driver. That was a remarkable aspect of his evangelistic gift.
It was. He obviously was psychologically or spiritually a very sensitive person, sensitive to what was happening inside other people. But he did also, practice listening to other people. He did take time to live into the personal dramas that other people were going through. So I think that his effectiveness in that is partly to do with he once said, basic human advice, listen twice as much as you talk. He did practice that. And that, I think, is a key element in his effectiveness.
So his starting point was not, you need to hear the 4 spiritual laws. Starting point was often to listen to people.
Absolutely, it was. And those spiritual laws, so those were.
Well, when I say that, sorry, Philip, when I say the 4 spiritual laws, I'm thinking of Bill Bright's 4 spiritual laws. There's often a method of evangelism, but he was prepared to listen. But there are 4 spiritual values that he did promote. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so just to finish that point, so he wasn't trying to bring a pre-prepared method to a situation, but often, what he did would evolve out of responding to what was actually happening in it. So those 4 absolute moral standards, he got those from another American influential preacher in the circles he was growing up with called Robert Speer. And then also from a Yale academic called Henry Wright. So those were honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. And those were broadly taken from various verses in the Gospels and the New Testament. I don't think he thought of them as laws exactly. I think he saw them as sort of deeper sort of principles which reflected the character of God. And as you take on board those, you become more sensitive to these forces within you of right and wrong, and they give you a moral grounding. So, spirituality without a sort of ethical foundation can become a bit wishy-washy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so he wanted people to find that grounding, and yeah.
So tell us who he influenced, and who specifically was responsive to his message.
Well, I think in the interwar period, I think that we could say that his audience was was students, particularly hugely influential on a younger generation, as we said earlier, looking for a sense of purpose in a fractured world. In an important spin-off of his work was not directly but indirectly very influential on the creation of Alcoholics Anonymous and the sort of principles behind it. So Oxford Group principles were used in that context, and you can see exactly the points from earlier that Alcoholics sort of reflect an attempt to translate some traditional Christian insights into the context of dealing with alcohol. So it's in the post-war period, the post-1945 period, that we start to see the influence of his movement, Moral Re-Armament, on sort of wider political issues. And I would say post-war, you'd have three areas which are sort of slightly interconnected. One would be post-war reconciliation, bridge building between previously warring parties. So France and Germany, which you've shown an interest in, and Japan and the Philippines being an example. And Buchman received awards from all those countries in the 1950s for his bridge building work. Connected with that, and you can see how it translates. The big issue for international diplomacy, I think, or one of them in the 1950s and 60s, was decolonization. And Moral Re-Armament did have some impact in trying to create mechanisms of dialogue between European colonial elites and indigenous African and Asian leaders. And then thirdly, again, slightly, you can see how the method keeps being transferred. Also industrial relations. In terms of post-war period, strikes, social conflict, a lot of people who worked with Moral Re-Armament tried to invest time and energy in bridge building between management and labor, and saying that the search not who is right, but what is right, is a good principle by which people can try to address industrial conflict. So I suppose those three areas, if you were roughly to summarize, would be where Moral Re-Armament's focus was.
Yes, and actually that last one, the industrial strife, this is what actually began to pique the interest of Robert Schuman, who was actually prime minister at the time. I think it was 1947, happened to be on a train journey in a coupe with a businessman who had just returned from one of these Moral Re-Armament conferences. And he had been, it involved the coal mining industry, the mine owners and the mine workers, and up in the French Lille area, the French mines. And when Schuman heard about this report, this man was so enthusiastic about the reconciliation that was coming between the executives and the management and the workers, that he said he must find out more about that. And that was to lead to much more consequences. But we'll come back to that. But you just mentioned Alcoholics Anonymous. It's kind of ironic that everybody knows AA and Alcoholics Anonymous, but very few people know Moral Re-Armament. But that really is a child of this movement. But obviously it gets its name from the developments that happened in the 30s. Can you just tell us what was happening in the 30s and where did this name come from?
Well, I guess there are things in the 1930s that are not unlike our own world. Social division, fragmentation, strident nationalism, major economic swings, but threats of depression and decline, propaganda, strong and erratic leaders, and a sense of foreboding that Europe may be about to, go back into a war again, in spite of the Treaty of Versailles and so on.
Well, probably because of.
Well, perhaps because of the failures of the end of the First World War. Mm. So, in one way, Buchman was looking for a message which would unify the different strands in his work, because there were different elements. There's the quite personal and there's a national, and unify the different strands of his work and say something which was really relevant to Europe at the time. He was not alone in doing that. Other religious leaders were doing that. I mean, there was an encyclical by the Pope at the time which attempted to do similar things. But Moral Re-Armament was he was basically saying everybody, whether they're Christians or not, can be part of nation building at a better level than what we're seeing. And maybe there needs to be military rearmament. He didn't say a lot about that, but he was not a pacifist, Buchman. But he was saying that security also has a moral dimension, a moral and spiritual dimension. So the launch of Moral Re-Armament in spring 1938 was his attempt to find a concept that would draw different elements together and speak into this, very dangerous world.
Yes. So rearmament was very much in the headlines, and because Germany was building this great big war machine, and so Britain, France, and the other nations. Holland, of course, rested on its neutral tradition, as did Switzerland. But this was the language of the time, just much as it is right now. And we want to come to this. What does this have to say to our current situation there? But Buchman, even, I don't know whether you write about it. I know Garth Lean writes about Buchman's attempts to get to Himmler and believed that if he could sit down with Himmler, he could convince him that this is not the right direction. Did you write about that?
I touch on it. And of course, it's a highly controversial element in Buchman's sort of activities in the 30s. So roughly from 1933 to 36, Buchman makes an effort to reach out into some of the, we're not talking about lots of influence here, but sort of influence on some of the Nazi leaders and say, could they be changed and find a different direction? Some, Bonhoeffer being example, thought Buchman was a bit naive in this area. I think that by the end of 36, he's beginning to feel that this is not really going to work. He's still hopeful of it because he's always a man who believes that anybody can change. It's hard to know exactly how his thinking evolves in those years of 36 to 39. But I think by 38, 39, he's beginning to feel that war is a real possibility. His movement itself is very criticized by the Nazis too. I mean, the Oxford group is marginalized and effectively closed down by the authorities. So, but he tends to take the view that people can change, and to try to find in difficult situations who are the people whose hearts might be open. I think whether he got that right about Himmler, hard to know.
Yeah. Well, before we go on to talk about, what does this all mean for us today? Let's trace through the Schuman story where it left off, and then even before that, the establishment of a Center for the Reconciliation of the Nations, what that led to, and the Konrad Adenauer Robert Schuman connection. Tell us about that.
About the birthing of Co and the post-war.
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, you've already alluded to the remarkable events, really, that take place in Co at the end of the 1940s, where large numbers of French and Germans from the French and German elites, political and industrial particularly, start to come to Co, which was a conference center founded in 1946 to play a role in post-war reconciliation. And
where is that?
That's in near Montreux, and it still operates.
Switzerland.
Yeah, on Lake Geneva.
Up in the mountains with one of the most fabulous views of the world, looking out over Lake Geneva. Yeah, Lake Léman.
That's right. Yeah. So Schuman catches Adenauer comes with his family in the late 40s. Schuman himself does not visit Co until the early 1950s, but he becomes very interested in the work being done there, and he picks up news that people from different sides of industrial conflict are finding unity through the work of Moral Re-Armament. He hears about it from examples in France, and this resonates with his training in Catholic social teaching. When Schuman, I think you touch on this, and it's a very important story. Schuman comes from a borderland region. He grew up speaking a dialect of German, and he always had this sense of conviction that he might be able to be a bridge builder. But he was also tempted to give up and go and live in a monastery. And Buchman encouraged him to take that sense of conviction that he could be a bridge builder, not to give up on it. So that's what happens at a dinner party in 1949. He says to Schuman, you have a part to play. Don't give up. There are Germans who are ready to work with and whom you can talk to. And having an aspiration to overcome hatred is a valuable thing to do. And in one sense, Buchman does not do more than be an encourager and be a networker.
And Schuman asked him, who can I trust in the new Germany? And what did Buchman say?
Well, because of people like Adenauer and other Germans coming to Co, the Moral Re-Armament group working through Co could provide names and links. And it was touch and go, because in the early 1950s, in early 1950, there was a lot of tension between France and Germany around the future of the Saar region, which had been such a sort of place of conflict.
That was an important mining area, and that had belonged to Germany, but taken over by the French. And the question was, who's going to have control of that? And that came to a point of personal tension between Adenauer and Schuman, if I'm correct.
That's right. So I think that although they're both Catholics, they're both people from the same religious background, they didn't instinctively trust each other. Mm-hmm. And they thought, you could just see Adenauer thinking, these wily French, they're still trying to get territory. And Schuman thinking, can you trust any Germans?
Yeah.
and so, in spite of their common religious heritage, that doesn't, immediately make them trust each other. So
no, at one stage, Adenauer called Schuman, or referred to him as a lying Alsatian. Correct. But then he caught himself and remembered the teaching of Moral Re-Armament, and he said, well, a changed world begins with a changed me. I need to change first. So that was a significant moment, I think.
Absolutely. That's right. It was a significant moment. And it tells you, though, that in a moment when real possibilities can happen, they're not inevitable. The pull of people ending up not trusting each other can be a sort of heavy weight that pulls people back. And I would say that Buchman but not Buchman alone, but the group of people who were working with him were kind of a catalyst, which sort of worked to make possible something that was possible, but might not have happened.
Now, this might be a good point to encourage listeners to watch the film that you can easily access online by Vimeo, and we'll just put up on the screen. It's called For the Love of Tomorrow. Tell us about that film, Philip.
Yes, so in the summer of 1947, at these big co-conferences, one of the visitors was a rather fiery French socialist called Irene Law. And she came to Co and noticed that there were Germans there and wanted to leave immediately. Even though some of those Germans were in fact from the opposition to Hitler, some women whose husbands had been killed by Hitler. But she had this sort of visceral reaction to anyone who was a German. And Buchman said to her, as she was preparing to leave, something like, how are you planning to build a new Europe? Which, immediately sort of invited, how could you create a Europe without Germans? This struck Irene Law so much that she, on a subsequent day at the conference, reached out publicly to the Germans present, and some of them were from, elite political backgrounds, asking forgiveness of her hatred.
And this was after she had a long conversation with the widow of Adam von Trott.
That's it.
Correct? Who had lost her children, had been taken away from her by the Nazis as well. And so this was a turning point for her.
That's it. That's right. So she stayed long enough to have a chat to I guess she began to have some contact with somebody from the German culture whom she could sort of relate to and respect.
Yeah.
And it led into this apology, and it led into a sort of strategy where a
public apology to the whole group there, right?
Yes, it was a public apology from the person whom everybody was worried about what she would say from the platform. Anyway, it led in as a result to quite an imaginative outreach journeys into Germany, into war, in which Irene Law would again publicly apologize for her hatred. And this was, she was a strong, quite charismatic personality, and it was. It was a very counterintuitive thing to do, if you like, for somebody whose family had been a victim of the Gestapo to introduce a note which was at a completely different spiritual level, touching on forgiveness and hatred and so on.
And she was not a church person, but she experiences as God doing something in her heart. And this seemed to be a very real turning point. Now, this aspect, this missing factor of the beginning point, the seeds of European integration, we often just look at it as economic and technological, but Schuman said from the start, no, it needs a soul. And this is what he was talking about, the spiritual, the forgiveness and the reconciliation and the confession, and of course this has contemporary parallels with what's it going to take in the future for Russia and Ukraine, but this seems to me to be a totally forgotten aspect, a missing aspect of telling the story at the beginning of European integration. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. I think it's probably an implicit point in your series, the Schuman Talks, that Europe had a moral and spiritual dimension in its origins, And I think, in fact, I think you say this in your introductory words, that without it, without something of that element, it becomes little more than a kind of framework for deal making, and it loses something. It ceases to actually draw excitement, and becomes something a little bit dead.
Yes, it's certainly not the approach of the American administration at this point in time, anyway.
No, that's a pity. That's a real pity.
Yes. So, okay. Now, before we actually start looking at the contemporary relevance of all of this, what do you see as being the strengths and limitations of Buchman's conviction that lasting social change begins with transformed individuals? You're quite a candid biographer when it comes to writing about Frank Buchman. What would you like to say about that?
Well, Buchman brings something important, but it's not the whole picture when it comes to nation building. He's, let's remember that in the European Union context, the actual plan which draws France and Germany together is somebody else's. It's Jean Monnet, and it's Monnet working with Schuman and others. So what Buchman brings is a framework for encouraging goodwill, if you like, a somewhat nebulous but important concept. Goodwill, people actually want an answer to a problem and are prepared to really work for it. If you're looking for nation building in troubled societies, there are a whole bunch of other things that are important. In modern Ukraine, which of course has been a focus of your talks, you would say, well, developing a culture of the rule of law is important. Establishing a civil society, functioning institutions. Occasionally, in some of Buchman's speeches, you've got sort of it would appear that just by doing one or two things at a spiritual level, everything can be sorted out. And it would be, I think, a mistake to assume that to think of moral rearmament as a quick fix solution to complex problems. You have to work at them over time. Even moral rearmament's so-called successes at post-war, they actually grow out of decades of work in France and Germany over a long time. They don't. The backstory is important. It's a bit like in our churches sometimes, Jeff. People exercise by a problem and rightly say, let's pray for it. And maybe hope that the prayers will just somehow lead to some miraculous change. And of course, prayer, I'm a great believer in prayer, but it needs to sort of be connected with action. And so,
in response to hearing the small voice, very often.
In terms of the still small voice, and there's some people who've criticised Buchman's tradition for saying it doesn't give enough emphasis on long-term grassroots change. It doesn't. It could do better in calling out evil in sort of being more stronger in promoting resistance, for example. Sometimes these have been issues of controversy, but actually the things that Buchman was trying to do were not that complicated. I mean, coming back to this theme of goodwill, you've got to have the will to create something different, and let's think of the Franco-German situation as like a set of pieces in a jigsaw which didn't really fit together, or didn't seem to fit together. And Buchman was essentially saying to Schuman, keep working at it, because actually you can get there. And there is a role for that sort of person and that sort of pastoral care at the level of statesmanship.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, we could spend a lot of time just talking about the history of the Moral Re-Armament movement. And in fact, 5 years ago, I interviewed Andrew Stalybras, who was the keeper of the archives, in a Schuman talk. And so just for our listeners, make a reference to that. You can find this on the youtube.com/c/Schuman Talks, the talk with Andrew Stalybras, if you'd like to follow that through more about what actually happened up there in this mountain house, which is a fabulous, well, we could call it Disneyland looking place with turrets and so forth, looking out over Montreux and the lake. But our main interest is, can we see a moral rearmament movement today? Do we need that? So coming back to our current situation, Ukraine, in its resistance and its brave resistance, and successful too, against Russian tyranny, has made us aware that we cannot take peace for granted. That's something that we in the West, we just thought, well, we nestle under American protection, et cetera, but we are being woken up rudely. What does this story of moral rearmament say to us today concerning where we need to see these absolutes being applied? If you were to be addressing Ukrainian leaders, what would you want to say to them, Philip?
Well, I've been very taken by some of the interviews you've done with Ukrainians, Jeff. An excellent one recently with Taras Zubyansky, and another very good one with some academics about the great Ukrainian wartime leader, Andrei Sheptytsky. Taras Zubyansky talks about the need to adhere to a paradigm of truth, that freedom needs responsibility.
Well, that's the absolute honesty, isn't it? The truth aspect.
This is in connection with values for Ukraine.
Yes.
Now Taras Zubyansky also talks about synthesis, about how the Ukraine could be a place where different traditions come together. Now, what could make that work? I mean, at the church level, let's think of the different religious traditions present. You've got the Greek Catholic in the West. You've got these rival Orthodox churches now, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate.
Yes.
You've got, of course, evangelicals, Baptists. You've got the Jewish tradition, so well represented by the President Zelensky.
Yes.
And in the particularly in Crimea, which of course Ukraine still lays claim to, you've got the
Tatars,
the
Muslims,
So this question of finding values that work for nation building, and which people from different, it's not enough to just say, we need more Christianity in Ukraine, because you've got different versions of it, and they don't all agree, and they sometimes don't like each other. So you've got to find a way of calling for moral rearmament. Might be a good phrase, but there might be other phrases that reflect Ukrainian traditions, which would sort of invite everybody to participate in nation building. So I think that's, at that level, I would say, and also, I mean, I think one should be wary of making facile statements about a country that has had so much trauma. But finding ways of talking to others, talking about overcoming hatred. It's another theme that comes out in one of your interviews, the challenge of overcoming hatred in this country. These are very relevant themes.
Yes, a coalition of freedom, somehow, how to find the values without putting the religious labels on them, that people can say, yes, this is what we are for, this is what we're about. It's about freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, It's about identity. I've gotten to know a number of leaders from different traditions, and they all speak very highly of each other. And the Maidan experience was
Right.
there was something forged in Maidan there of praying together, of even sharing Eucharist together, etc., etc. That there was a very real sense of an ecumenical spirit forged in the fire there. And that gives me hope. And in fact, I've come to think of Ukraine as being a laboratory for recovering the soul of Europe by recognizing as they struggle, how do we recover our soul? It raises the questions for us in Europe. Well, what do we mean by soul and how do we recover it? And I think Buchman's four absolutes begin to point us in that right direction. Let's just go through them again. Absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute selflessness, and absolute love.
That's it.
Can you unpack those a wee bit for us a bit further?
Well, you could say that they are a way of doing a moral inventory of your life.
So at a personal level, yeah?
Yeah, at a personal level. I mean, I'm a bit wary of thinking about them as a sort of checklist, but if you prayerfully, to use a Christian framework, if you prayerfully bring those principles into your life, you can become aware of areas where you fall short, and where sometimes little things, I mean, my own experience is sometimes quite little things can matter in terms of recovering a sense of God's presence and peace. Moral Re-Armament's tradition has emphasized that these are kind of a practical way of starting. Get started.
Yeah. But let's apply this to nation building. Absolute honesty when it comes to social media. I mean, we all know we're constantly being bombarded with fake news and outlandish statements at one level, and another level, corruption, the widespread corruption that Ukraine started with. And even though we hear a lot more about corruption, within Ukraine right now, the fact that we're hearing about it, that's actually new, and that's just the pressure from society, from the bottom up, especially from young people, that I think can be seen as a positive sign. So applying that principle on the nation building side, I think is very necessary. Yeah.
I think it's a great one. I've been dipping into some of the Old Testament prophets recently in my reading, and Jeremiah talks about how people ended up by bending the truth and becoming strong in falsehood. And this sort of this way of doing politics and advertising, which I mean, propaganda tends, historians will tell you this, propaganda tends to work by promoting half-truths rather than downright lies. They're much harder to deal with. And so this thing about honesty and integrity, it's partly about saying things that are truthful, but it's also partly, I think, about being truthful in the way you interact with people. Are your relationships honest and truthful? Are you honest? I mean, I came across a really interesting quote as I was preparing for this, Jeff, by an Australian, a great Australian politician who was quite influenced by Moral Re-Armament, Kim Beazley, and he was greatly played a big role in building bridges with Indigenous Australia.
Yes, anyway, he's actually visited Co, hasn't he? He's spoken at Co. Yeah.
I mean, he's died now. But one of the things he said from his experience with Moral Re-Armament was that it helped him to shine a light on his motives. What is my, and secretly, I would say, he was effectively saying this about himself, that if he put personal ambition second and a real sense of trying to find God's direction and leading first, he would be led to what he was meant to do. So shining a light on his motives. Are my motives honest, or are my actions secretly driven by a desire for power and influence?
Mm-hmm,
and I think
mm-hmm.
both Schuman and Beazley, for example, were people who were somewhat affected by this, so that it's not who is right, but what is right. But it's also what is the deeper thing I'm meant to do in this situation. Anyway, being honesty is a whole world, and of course it's connected with the other standards as well. It's connected with love,
Yes.
purity, unselfishness.
Yes.
They all mingle in with each other, these standards.
Yes, and selflessness. If we say now, we're hearing a lot about making our country great, our country first, and so on. But combined with love, which involves loving your neighbor as yourself, and as Schuman pointed out, our neighbor is not just the person who lives next door. As French people, our neighbors are the Germans. So what does it mean to love our neighbor as ourselves? That's
Right.
a huge challenge. But when you're stressing my country first, let's make our nation great, this is going to create friction in the world. And so both of those two principles are hugely fundamental for nation building.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that Buchman might have said about, make my country great again. Well, greatness is good, but what type of greatness are you looking for?
Yes.
And is it a greatness that involves dominating other people, or is it a deeper greatness, a more not necessarily always more successful in the short term, but leaving something really fundamentally important for the family of the world, the family of nations. So let's take greatness and look at it more profoundly. What is it?
Yes, and Jesus talked about who is the greatest among you is the one who serves.
Exactly,
and,
that's right.
Yeah. So these are not just theoretical. Yeah, these spiritual principles that actually have been very, very fundamental for the whole process of European integration, realizing we need to seek the common good, seek for the good of the whole of the human race, not just our own our own tribe. And so how can we encourage this? This is the challenge. How do we get back to what Buchman was able to do, use contemporary language to speak to the contemporary challenges that we face? I think this is a challenge that we have to take with us today.
It is, and it involves, I don't have an immediate quick answer to how to do this, Jeff, but I think that we're all trying, you, me, people I know, trying to think imaginatively. Yes. I know, for me, a student of Slavic countries, Russian history and so on, I think Ukraine, I think principles like truth, conscience, responsibility, these could be unifying national values. Goodwill, Gandhi was very keen on goodwill, and Buchman was an admirer of Gandhi, as you know, great admirer of him. Yes. So I think finding values that will draw us out to be the best we can be is part of the work of translation.
Yes.
The common good you referred to. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the common good. That's a great concept.
Yes, it's a part of the Catholic social thinking as well. And yes, you were pointing out that Schuman came from a border area and was very conscious of the close by neighbors, but that was also true of Adenauer. He came from the western side of Germany, the border area. Alcide de Gasperi, the Italian, also came from Tyrol, that had been part of Austria and now part of Italy. And so the three of them are very conscious of, well, we have to come up somehow with right relating to our neighbors, rather than just if you live in Rome or you live in Berlin or if you live in Paris, you live in the center of your own worlds. And so all of us can grow in our sensitivity towards the other, our neighbors. Philip, it's been very great to have this conversation. We could go on for much longer, I think. But thank you very much for your work in bringing to the front the spirituality of Frank Buchman. I encourage those of you who be interested to get a hold of that book and read it. Philip has a very candid look at what Buchman has to offer, and I think it's become a very current issue for us in these days, where we hear a lot of talk about rearmament. How can we encourage moral rearmament in our own nations using appropriate language for today? Any last statement, Philip?
No, I mean, I think, as I said at the beginning, Buchman was part of an attempt to make faith, moral values relevant to the building of international society, making our world work. And it's relevant for our own day, and it's a challenge for us to do the same.
Yes. And so your book is called The Spirituality of Frank Buchman. And then there is a classic biography of Frank Buchman by Garth Lean called Frank Buchman, A Life, or On the Tail of a Comet. Now, it's probably out of publication, but you might be able to find secondhand copies on online on Amazon and so forth. Both these books I highly recommend of getting an understanding for the times in which we live today. Thank you, Philip. I want to it's been great chatting with you today, and I want to just give people an opportunity to come and get to know this story a bit more in our summer school. We're going to be having in the 3 weeks of July 3 modules on engaging the city, engaging the public square, and then engaging Europe, and particularly engaging Europe. We'll be referring to the story again. We'll start off in Amsterdam. We'll be looking at how the gospel, the role that gospel has been playing. We're going to be looking at moments of grace in the Schuman story, in the downfall of communism, and moments of grace in the current Ukraine story as well. And so we will actually go halfway through that week. We will go down to Brussels and get to know some of the European institutions there and meet some interesting people associated with those institutions. So you can find us on ywamamsterdam.com/engage, or use this QR to find the website for more information about this summer school. Thank you very much.